Well, welcome, Natural Resources class. Yeah, here we go. Mineral Resources, video lecture number 3. I thought you might enjoy the picture. You don't see too much complaining about price of gas right now, but if you do have it in your memory of when we were paying $4 plus a gallon, a sign like you see here might have been more common. Yeah, regular arm 9/10, leg plus leg 9/10, premium, firstborn 9/10. This issue of what we pay for gas and the importance of gas to our economy, to the world economy, and the role that it plays is complicated. This article from Earth Magazine. Earth Magazine is a magazine that looks at geologic research. That's the reason for the name. But among their issues is of course mineral resources. And a few years back, they published one called "The Thirsty Dragon and the Wealthy Bear." I'm just going to read you the first 3 paragraphs. It says, "It's a brave new world. China and Russia are changing the terms of energy geopolitics and in the process changing everyone's place in the world. These growing powers are gaining influence and shifting foreign policy relationships by currying favors with oil-producing states, building regional influences and dependency, and disregarding human rights abuses. By extending, by extending their unique brands of democracy, in quotes, into the energy game, the two nations are compromising U.S. efforts to promote its foreign policy agenda." In a 2008 report, Freedom House, a non-governmental organization based in Washington, D.C., that promotes democracy, explains this trend as a resurgence of pragmatic, market-oriented, or energy-rich dictatorships. Most visibly in Russia and China, but also in other parts of the world, governments are trying to harness the power of the marketplace while maintaining closed political systems. Strengthened by petroleum-based riches or capital amassed through long-term trade surpluses, these autocracies are unapologetic and increasingly assertive at home and abroad in declaring that the paradigm of rights-based governance as the international community has long understood it is not relevant for the 21st century. That's kind of scary, but that is the take that some of these large nations, rich or energy-rich nations, are taking. And some of the ways this happens is, for instance, China, they may bid on a oil field competitively with the United States, but on the side they'll make this deal: if you accept our bid, we'll give you a real bottom line price on arms, on tanks, on machine guns, on new ships, military goods, or it might be some other economic thing. Most commonly it's military goods. And so they'll win the bid that way. While their bid is close to ours, it's that side deal that they may even not be as good as ours, but it's that side deal that wins them the bid. And so yeah, this is a difficult issue. If we look where we left off, pick up where we left off last time, I promised to just talk briefly about that last line: reserves located by using stratigraphy and seismic testing, 3D and 4D imaging. Stratigraphy is basically looking at the layers of the Earth and basically looking for places where where the strata would indicate there would be a reservoir of gas or oil, like an anticline. Okay, so I have here a couple of prospectuses. If you have some venture capital and you want to throw some money at an oil investigation operation, which I wouldn't do right now. One is by Castle Resources, another by Apache Resources, one out of Colorado, one out of Kansas. And they'll publish a prospectus telling you how good the likelihood that they will have of finding gas or oil if they drill, for instance, a well right here. And they're going to show you an image like this, and your job is to sort of sort through and figure out how much data they have to support their assertion. Or you might own land and they want to prospect on your land. Some common terms are that they would pay you $10 per acre for 5 years for the right to prospect on that land. if they're going to frack it, they may pay up to $200 an acre for a period of time. That's right up front money. They may not even actually do the testing, but they want to shut out other people from exploring there and hold that right for themselves. So to do that kind of exploration, stratigraphy, they'll need to do some drilling and some studying of past maps. They may also do seismic testing. These are called vibrator trucks or stomping trucks. There's many different forms of them. But basically, they put this big platform down on the ground. They'll lift the whole truck up off the ground with it, and then they'll send sort of vibratory waves through the earth and then read their rebound back. And since fluids like oil and gases like natural gas will conduct these waves differently than solid earth, they're looking for those differences in rebound to determine whether or not there's gas and oil under there. And so that'll give them a three-dimensional look, sort of east, west, north, south, as well as elevationally up and down. How deep is the oil? And then 4D imaging, it entails the idea that these fields of oil aren't necessarily always static. Sometimes they're on the move, believe it or not. Seismic shifting, plate shifting can cause that. And so 4D is simply adding the time element. How did those oil fields change through time? If they find an oil field and are able to extract oil from it, maybe say this operation is successful. They pull the drill stem up. You see this pool right here. That's when they pull the drill stem up. One of the uses of it is the water and oil that they've used will spill into there and evaporate away, but be contained. So let's say that drilling operation is successful. They strike oil. Only about 30% on average, 30% of an oil field's potential is extracted during normal pumping operations. And if you look in your notes, it says that. That means that this field of oil, this pool of oil, if you will, that may be a mile below the surface right here, they only are actually usually able to pump about 30 to maybe 40% of that oil. The rest remains in the ground. It simply doesn't flow to the wellhead fast enough to justify pumping it. Or they may put the pump on a timer after a while when flow slows down and pump it a little more gradually. So oil companies, knowing that there's more oil down there, are always looking for ways to what they call stimulate the field. And they might put superheated steam down there to sort of wash the oil out and allow it to flow more freely to the wellhead. Or they might put a detergent down there and free it from the soil that it's bound to and cause it to flow more freely to the wellhead. It's got to be cost effective, but those are some things that they might do. Again, as I mentioned before, a barrel of oil is 42 gallons, not 55 gallons like we would assume associate with a normal barrel. So 42 gallons is a barrel of oil. And if you think about nations around the world that, how much they use, let's start with the U.S. We use, I'll leave that picture of a barrel up there. We use, on average, about 21.5 million barrels per day. Right now, I suspect we have gone way south of that. Since there's less traffic, less air traffic, everything, I bet we're easily a third to half of that. They were talking about how air quality has improved in LA and New York and other places because people were driving so much less. Too bad we have to go through something like this to achieve that. So the U.S. uses 21.5 million barrels a day, 7.9, almost 8 billion barrels per year. And as of 2014, in your notes, you see 38% imported, 62% domestically produced. That means produced within this country. I have an update, a little more recent, from 2017, that the U.S. imported only 19% of its oil and produced 81% domestically. I would suspect, again, also that domestic production is probably, if this price trend continues, that's going to increase even more because it just won't pay to ship that oil long distances if you're only getting a little bit of money for it. Worldwide, we use 86 million barrels a day or 31 billion barrels a year. So every 20 years or so, the USGS, that's the U.S. Geological Survey, is charged with estimating the amount of proven reserves that remain, both in the United States and the world. And 2002 was the last time one of those was completed. Of course, we're due for another one. But at that time, they estimated about 100+ year supply of oil. That means that, folks, we're not going to run out in your lifetime, probably not in your kids' lifetime either. And up until recently, we still find more oil each year than we use. Think about that. Now, that's not going to be the case this year. With the price so low, there isn't the incentive to go drill for more oil, so we will not find more oil this year than we use this year. In other words, we won't add more proven reserves to the books, if you will, than we use this year because the price is so low. That oil's still in the ground, it's still there, but there's simply not the motivation to go explore for it right now. That whole economic piece of oil is interesting. A few years back, people started doing a little investigation. I think this might have been 08, 09, even back with the fall. When times got tight, people started looking at companies' bottom lines, and some of the big oil companies kind of got busted. They were inflating the value of their stock by saying they had all this proven reserves booked that they had bid on and won bids on oil, on rights to drill for oil, and they had estimates of such and such proven reserves, and that caused their stock to be at a certain level. When they actually looked at those numbers from the companies, they found that they were inflated. Probably they inflated them to inflate their stock value. And so they had to reduce those numbers, and of course their stock fell accordingly as well. But so this whole issue of how much oil is there left is still an interesting topic. I'm going to show you another picture from 1973. Sorry, here we go, 1970. I actually remember this, 1973. I didn't get my driver's license for a couple of years yet, but I sure remember this on the evening news. In that year, the United States backed Israel in one of its wars against its neighbors. And Israel was being invaded by Egypt and Syria and Jordan, I believe. I'm not quite sure on all three of them, but I think Syria and Egypt for sure. Probably Jordan. And so because we backed Israel and basically supported them in that effort to repel the invaders, other Islamic nations stopped sending us oil. Now you saw we used to import a lot more than we do now. And with that loss of import, there was fuel shortages all around the country, and this was commonplace. There's pumps here and here, okay, car on each side, car on each side. Look at the lines. I recognize most of the models. Took my driver's test in that one. Dang, that thing was huge. Try to parallel park that. So anyway, look at there, a Mustang. Here's a Maverick. Here's looks like a Nova. Yeah, anyway, they're waiting in line, not terribly fuel efficient either. They're waiting in line for gas, and look how long they had to wait. And sometimes that wait caused them to, the gas station to run out of gas, so they had to wait all that time and there wasn't even any fuel for them. Well, OPEC was largely to blame for this. And OPEC is an acronym for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And OPEC controls 81% of the world's proven reserves of crude oil. So we better pay attention to what OPEC thinks, but we're not going to be ruled by OPEC, if you will. Now, OPEC is sort of a nation or an organization in flux. Here's a list of current countries. Well, it depends on who you look at. So we have Ecuador, Venezuela, Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia. I guess Congo and Equatorial Guinea are also currently in it, although I'm not, seems to be a little bit up in the air. So those are the countries. They're not all Islamic countries. Certainly Indonesia is, and these countries here are. Parts of Nigeria, a lot of Nigeria is, not all, but some of these are not, and certainly South American countries, they're not Islamic. So OPEC is a complicated organization, and their whole mission is to get together, agree on production numbers to keep the price high. They don't want to just all be pumping everything they can onto the market, drive the price down, and not make money. So if they agree on production quotas, they'll keep the production, you know, low but not too low, but price as high as they can. And that's OPEC's job. So in 73, OPEC embargoed the U.S., said you can't have any more oil from us, and this resulted. And so that really was in the collective consciousness of the United States, and it was part of the impetus behind the development of the Bakken, the Eagle Ford, the Marcellus Shale, all the fossil fuel resources that the United States has. But it does beg another question. Who has, by nation now, a lot of proven reserves? Now that's proven reserves. Remember, there are other types of reserves, and proven reserves are changing constantly. Well, as you might guess, Saudi Arabia is top of the list. Okay, right there, Saudi Arabia. Wait a second here, though. If you look at the most recent numbers, now I know I have Saudi Arabia at the top in your notes, but in actuality, Venezuela is now top of the list, and they're claiming 302 billion barrels of proven reserve, while Saudi Arabia is claiming 297 billion barrels. Now again, take that with a grain of salt. Some are not convinced that's all true of Venezuela, but we do know they have a lot of crude oil, and the Energy Information Administration believes it's credible enough that they do list them at the top for oil reserves. They list Iran second at 208 billion barrels. You'll notice Iran was fourth. I'm sorry, third. Iran was fourth, but that was before, when they were being basically punished for their support of terrorism worldwide, and we were embargoing them, and that really shut down their ability to develop their oil fields. Well, we pulled the lid off that under the Obama administration. They have since developed their oil fields in close partnership with Russia, and have now taken over third place when it comes to proven reserves. But notice Canada there. Now, if you look back at Canada years back, their proven reserves, right here, were not that significant. You would not have seen this big green blob here. Okay, that's because Canada's oil reserves are of a unique sort. They are actually tar sands. Now, most of Canada's oil is found locked in tar, as tar around sands. It's a very heavy, viscous fluid. It wasn't commercially exploitable in the past, but with the price of oil going high enough, it became commercially exploitable, and that those tar sands would be mined out of there by these trucks would be carrying them to processing plants. The processing plants will basically heat up those tar sands, separate out the sand, the oil from the sand, put the sand back in the hole, cleaned, if you will, and sell the oil. So Canada, all of a sudden, with the development of that industry, became a major worldwide player when it came to crude oil. Look at the U.S. It's tied for 11th with Nigeria at 37 billion barrels. Actually, the more updated number, the end of 2018, I have an updated number. That's up to 44 billion barrels. Just think about that, folks. We have, back 10 years ago, this would have been in the 20 billion barrels. So this new research and development and new abilities, new technologies has caused us to increase the amount of our proven reserves. More oil was not made underneath U.S. soil, but more oil was discovered and made pumpable by new technologies. So, yeah. So then the next line in your notes is, who pumps a lot? Oh, look at that. The U.S. pumps more oil than anyone, even Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is second, but, well, actually Russia is now second. As of 2020, Russia has surpassed Saudi Arabia. So it goes now U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia for 1, 2, and 3 as to who pumps a lot. We're using our resources. Wow. Okay, so who do we import from? Now, I bet if I asked the class that, you would think of some Middle Eastern nation, typically Saudi Arabia. But if you think about it economically, no, it's Canada that we import the most from. They're close, and they have a lot, so that should make sense. Mexico is number 2. They're close and they have a lot. Then comes Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Venezuela. And some of the Nigerian stuff is because of the quality of it. Different types of oil is of different quality. Sweet crude, for instance, you might hear that name. That's oil that has a low sulfur content. We definitely want that to reduce sulfur emissions. Okay. So the U.S. has only 2.2% of proven reserves, but is the largest oil extractor. And we use 25 to 30% of extracted oil, worldwide extracted oil annually. We also export some oil, believe it or not. We import some and we export some. It's a crazy world. Thinking of countries with sort of unique takes on this whole oil issue, if I back out of here, well, here we'll show you where this is where the tar sands come from. So here's British Columbia, here's Saskatchewan, this is Alberta. Here around Fort McMurray in western Alberta, that's one of the main focal points of the tar sands industry, and you can see that it's a big player there. You don't really see a whole lot from the road, so if we go and we go right down to the site, get an idea for what that country looks like. It's tundra. It's pretty in its own right, but you don't really see too much going on, not like you would from an aerial photo. All right, so oops, let me back that out of there. There we go, tar sands. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, we use a lot of oil, but we also, it is argued, make a lot of products and goods and products that the world depends on with that oil. So it's not like we're just hogs and just kind of sucking it all up for our own use. We make things that the world needs. Now, who has a lot of proven reserves? Russia is listed as having only 80 billion barrels, but nah, that's typically only from this region around the Caspian Sea. It's been exploited for a long time. There's huge reserves in Russia. Interestingly enough, we mentioned this with the wood issues. They don't get along with China. China and Russia don't trust each other. They do sell some goods across the border, but not nearly what you would think they would, given the close association of a major market with a major source. Other fields that are new, these along this coast of Western Africa are being developed, off the coast of South America, big new fields. This one right here off the east coast of Greenland, that one is currently got a lot of people interested. This is North Sea oil. Here's the country of Norway. They took an interesting perspective on their North Sea oil, the reserves that they had, not a huge quantity, but Norway decided to, as a nation, they're a bit socialist, so they have Statoil is their national oil company, if I remember it right, and they decided to simply pump all their oil, just pump as much as they could out of the ground when prices were high, and sort of bank that money. And you know, they know they're going to pump it out, but they want that money in their bankrolls. So interesting take on different country strategies for using their resources. Here's Saudi Arabia, and they're taking a different approach. They're sort of inhibiting the amount of oil they pump so that they keep prices high. So yeah, next time we'll talk a little bit about where it goes.